The relationship between games and cinema has always felt a bit like watching your younger sibling try to impress their cooler older brother. Earnest but slightly desperate in picking up a lot of his bad habits. While movies have had over a century to perfect their craft, games are still the new kid, despite being over 40. You can always spot this by how games are pitched. It's like insert movie, but playable. But in recent years, games have grown enough to where the phrase, "it's like insert movie but playable," is actually possible. In some instances, games are a better fit for an aging movie franchise than cinema, as evidenced by the success of their imitators. Nathan Drake and Lara Croft stand out as the most obvious copycats, having borrowed Indy's hat while carefully filing off the serial numbers. But really, any game that features a protagonist solving puzzles while shooting bad guys between bouts of avoiding traps and pitfalls owes Dr. Jones serious royalties at the least. Every fundamental element that made the films revolutionary, the seamless blend of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving, has become so thoroughly baked into gaming's DNA that it should have been impossible to make an Indiana Jones game that doesn't feel like it's copying its own imitators. Yet interestingly, The Great Circle manages to sidestep this creative theft crisis by borrowing from playbooks Indy never wrote, namely stealth mechanics and open-world game design. You'll spend most of your time in disguise, sneaking up on fascists in order to brain them with a frying pan. It's rather like playing Condemned, except instead of beating homeless people with pipes, you're bashing Nazis with museum exhibits, a morally superior if mechanically similar endeavor. But unlike in other stealth games, where being spotted means you're reloading your most recent save to do the section again until you get it right, screwing up stealth in the Great Circle feels like something that was incorporated into the design, which was smart, since the stealth kind of sucks. It never really sets you back, instead encouraging frantic running around to escape or beat Nazis filing into the room with whatever Indy can grab until there's a pile of unconscious Germans and Italians at his feet, then rewarding yourself by eating every piece of stale bread in the vicinity like you fought in the world's most questionable bakery. It goes a long way toward creating a lot of cathartic moments that feel at home in an Indiana Jones experience, which might explain why gunplay is the worst part of the game. It isn't exactly emphasized, but it does have to be there since Indy did casually shoot that guy in Raiders. It feels deliberately stunted. There's the standard limited ammo excuse, but that's only because Indy doesn't understand how to reload German weapons, one has to assume. An enemy shrug off headshots like they're wearing steel plates under their skull, yet crumple to the ground at the tap of a toilet brush. The puzzles oscillate between absurd ancient mechanisms, because every lost civilization was staffed exclusively by escape room designers who were really good at making rocks slide against each other without any lubricant, and the more mundane task of cracking Nazi safes to steal their meticulously cataloged travel guides and self-help books. But the biggest addition is perhaps the open-world structure, which manages to avoid the usual pitfall of feeling like a cancerous growth of side content. Instead, these diversions feel like deleted scenes from an extended cut, rather than the usual checkbox-ticking exercises in player retention. Sure, you'll need to collect an arbitrary number of ancient scribbles to advance a plot, but at least it feels less like busy work and more like actual archaeology. If archaeology involves significantly more Nazi bonking than is typically documented in academic journals, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle managed to avoid feeling like a clone of the genre he inspired. But more importantly, it's better than the last few movies that come out of the franchise. This is a series I grew up with. Temple of Doom was the first movie I can recall watching and being entranced by. Even the racist bits that got abandoned in Indy are moments I cherish, which likely goes toward explaining a few things about myself, since a 4-year-old shouldn't enjoy watching a man's heart be ripped out quite so much, or an entire ethnic group be depicted as bug-eating cultists. But damn it, this series hasn't blown for the entire time I've been an adult. Watching Harrison Ford approach the last two movies with his regular disdain of "let's film this piece of shit already" has made me thoroughly hate the elderly. One pitfall that games stumble into when adapting a movie series is the nostalgia checklist, the insistence on recreating famous scenes, even within a completely original plot. In The Great Circle, they try to get that out of their system early with the Raiders tutorial sequence, like ripping off a bandage quickly rather than slowly peeling away at our nostalgia throughout the entire game. But they couldn't leave the parallelism alone, and followed that up by having Indiana travel to several locations adjacent to the places he visited previously in the movies. In Rome, he's pursued by a secret society bent on keeping the world from discovering a powerful ancient relic, just like in The Last Crusade, and follows that up with a trip to a Nazi dig site in Giza, which is only a stone's throw away from Cairo where Raiders mostly took place. The pit stops to Nepal and Shanghai feel especially on the nose. The only time the game adventures out of familiar territory is near the end in Thailand, since I'm guessing they didn't want to risk getting the game banned in India again with a racist depiction of the people there.
This is it. This is where Forrestal cashed in.
Friend of yours?
A competitor. He was good. He was very, very good.
Getting Harrison Ford to act is a bit like rubbing peanut butter in a horse's gums to make it look like it's talking. I've always gotten the sense Harrison Ford views acting as an inconvenient thing that keeps happening to him despite his best efforts to avoid it. Troy Baker, on the other hand, is so prolific he's practically gaming's white bread. He brings that earnest theater kid energy to everything he does, which makes his take on Indiana Jones feel like watching someone doing really good Harrison Ford impressions. Technically accurate, but he's clearly enjoying the opportunity too much. So he's missing that essential, I would rather be fixing a cabinet right now energy that Harrison brings to every role. I've always wondered how Indy knew that light was a tripwire. It's simply a light beam pouring through a hole in the temple wall. That would have to be incredibly common in a ruin. Has he encountered this before? I don't even know how this works. The light isn't shining on anything. Also, this would be a terrible tripwire since it would only be active for an hour or two on non-cloudy days when the sun would be in the right place. An actual archaeologist would make an entire career out of studying this ruin and the complex mechanisms ancient people devised to protect it. Indy, on the other hand, only has eyes for the shiny relic at the end of it. The real irony is that if he actually wrote up proper papers on all these sites, he'd likely revolutionize multiple fields of historical study. Imagine the archaeological journals on the practical applications of ancient South American defense systems, or an analysis of the proof of the existence of God and the proper boiling point of Nazis. Ancient civilizations had a bizarre architectural fetish for building elaborate death mazes around trinkets they apparently never intended to use again. It's like the ancient world's equivalent of those people who buy expensive china sets and cabinets for storing them and never actually eat off them, except scaled up to let's build an entire temple complex with rotating walls and poison dart launcher levels of commitment. Think about the sheer logistics of it all. Some ancient ruler sits down with their engineering team and goes, "Right, we've got this perfectly functional fertility idol here. Instead of, using it or displaying it somewhere sensible, I want you to build an entire mountain's worth of architecture around it. And yes, I know we're in a drought and the people are starving, but these spike pits aren't going to build themselves." Coming from the same developers as the Wolfenstein games, it's odd that the goriest the Great Circle ever gets is when it's recreating a scene from Raiders. If the movies could feature a person's heart being ripped out and getting crushed in rock grinders, then the devs could have pushed things a bit more. When I take a sledgehammer to a man's skull, I expect more than a bonk sound. As it turns out, Indy was only dreaming about his adventures in South America and is actually back in his office at Marshall College with Marcus. He's awoken by someone breaking into the college's museum to steal a cat mummy that Indy discovered in Siwa recently. The thief then knocks Indy out and instead of leaving out the door, climbed up a bookcase and broke through the window while leaving behind his pendant hanging on the broken window frame, a pendant which has a sigil of the Vatican's secret archive on it. So Indy decides upon leaving work in the middle of the midterms to travel to Rome to find the thief on his own. Not once did either Indy or Marcus consider calling the police about the robbery. It can't be that hard to track down an 8-foot-tall black man walking around Connecticut in the 1930s after robbing a school.
Someone's left you a gift.
It's best to ignore any mention of Marion in this game, just like we ignored the fact that Indy dated her when she was only 14 years old and he was a grown man. She's owed a mention due to when the game is set, between Raiders and the Last Crusade, but the game can't do anything about her, since canonically Indy doesn't meet her again until the 50s. The Vatican is currently full of Mussolini's black shirts, the story mode difficulty setting of World War II villains. Oddly, the enemies seem to have a sense of honor about the whole melee combat situation. As long as Indy doesn't pull out a gun, they'll stick with throwing punches instead of drawing their own firearm to execute him. On more than one occasion, I even saw an enemy put away their gun so they could take a swing at Indy. Indy is a dog lover, so he can't harm dogs, even the ones attacking him. Only brush them off and then feel bad for making them whine. And then the dog gets up and attacks you again and the cycle repeats. There's something incredibly absurd about Indy being able to take bullets because he found some Nazis' abandoned strudel. Bandages healing bullet wounds but pastries preventing them is the kind of video game logic that's so backwards it circles right around to being entertaining.
What's that?
I said, who is Father Ventura?
Shh, that's him.
Father Antonio is hard of hearing, having to wear hearing aids, yet is able to identify Father Ventura by his footsteps on the floor above them as he discusses Mussolini's visit to the Vatican. Then this nearly deaf priest is able to hear what's going on outside his office window while listening to American jazz records.
Looking for someone. A tall fella. Very tall. Like a giant.
I know you're trying to be sensitive here, Indy, but you can mention a few more identifiable traits other than being tall.
Well, the only giants I heard about is from back in the 16th century. And a certain Father Crescenzo claimed to have seen secret messages inscribed in the oldest buildings of the Vatican.
Apparently, no one assumes this guy is a naturally tall individual, but must be from an ancient race of giants.
Il Duce has eyes and ears everywhere, even in the Holy City.
Vi siete fatto un amico, padre?
That's pretty much the standard Catholic priest jump scare, always appearing when you're discussing something in private. Indy buys a camera from the Lost and Found to photograph the carvings on secret giants left behind by a mad priest. But his camera can take color photos, which is odd because color film wasn't widely used until the 1950s. And Indy also doesn't have the photos developed, bringing them back to Antonio's office for inspection like he's taking Polaroids. Ancient giants, apparently concerned with keeping their secret monastery hidden, decided the best security system was to create elaborate mausoleums and monasteries hidden under the Vatican, complete with wine-activated combination locks, because of European regulations, I guess. Part of the trail they left behind requires grave robbery of their own kind. Imagine being the giant in charge of this system. How should we protect our sacred monastery's location? I know, let's have them dig up Brother Steve. You mean Steve who died protecting our secrets in the Crusades? Yeah, we'll put the directions to our hidden monastery in his ribcage. He won't mind.
The Lord revealeth his secret unto his servants.
Is that so? Dr. Indiana Jones, Professor Archaeology Department, Marshall College, Bedford, Connecticut.
Does Indy keep his ID inside his journal?
I'm an investigative journalist, and right now I'm looking into the disappearance of someone very dear to me. She was abducted more than 6 months ago. And I believe your friend Emmerich Voss is responsible.
That's Dr. Laura Lombardi.
Do you know her?
She's one of the world's leading experts in ancient languages.
Yes, and most importantly, she's my sister.
They must be executing writers who fail the Bechdel test nowadays, because they're all writing the same female character. Clearly stated profession, and always looking for either their sister, mother, or girlfriend.
I had an affair with my mother-in-law. I fear that my mother-in-law is with the child also.
Jesus Christ, what have you done?
Wait. You are not a priest.
Sorry, pal, but you kind of deserved it.
Indy started a relationship with a teenage Marion while 10 years her senior, and later in life knocked her up, leaving her to raise their son all on her own, which led to him turning into Shia LaBeouf. In my book, that's worse than knocking up your mother-in-law.
It's been restored. The foundation is at least 1,000 years old.
This fountain has been undergoing restoration, yet somehow none of the construction crew discovered there was an elaborate door to a secret area of the Vatican. The Nephilim Order set up a trial for anyone wishing to enter their secret monastery. First, you solve the fountain puzzle, then nearly burn to death in a test that can only be solved if 2 people are present, one of which can't be taking the trial since you have to hand the steely off to them and retrieve it from them, and finally forging 2 huge keys that can be picked up right after they're poured into the mold. That's a lot of work to keep these chambers stoked and supplied with coal. Also, random people the Nephilim don't even want here can undergo a rite of passage, and then be told to leave by the first giant they see and are attacked by if they don't comply. The old knight from the last crusade was far more fair about this sort of arrangement. Mussolini, Voss, and the priest must have known a quicker way into the Vatican's occult storage that didn't require one to undergo several trials, which makes that entire process rather ridiculous if there's a front entrance.
Unabdingbar für den Sieg. Das verstehen Sie sicherlich, Pater Ventura.
Ho accettato di mostrarvi la sala del tesoro segreta, ma non si può prendere niente.
Europe used to communicate like a Tekken cutscene, because these 3 are holding a conversation in 2 different languages without a translator.
Ich vertraue ihr darauf, wie die Muskeln ihren Mund zucken, wie sich ihr orbiculares Oris zusammenzieht. Ihre himmelschreienden Sünden stehen ihr buchstäblich ins Gesicht geschrieben. Widerwärtige Verbrechen gegen den Heiligen Geist.
Voss uses Nazi pseudoscience to tell Father Ventura that he has dick-sucking lips, and that he knows he uses them. Locus, the big guy, stole the cat mummy from Indy and brought it all the way back here to the Vatican to store along with the other statues, making it easier for someone like Voss to steal them all at once. The Nephilim Order is supposedly this ancient society of giants dedicated to protecting these stones. The fact that they watched the fascists literally bulldoze their way through their ancient monastery and thought, this seems fine, let's keep our priceless artifacts right here, instead of moving them out of the country really puts their centuries of successful secret-keeping into question.
Vertrauen Sie mir, Exzellenz. Sobald wir alle Relikte haben, werden unsere beider Nationen unaufhaltsam sein.
If we're being brutally honest, Italy is going to need a few more ancient Christian relics to give it a leg up in the war.
You know, us Americans always nosing about.
With a gun and a whip.
Why would you send your black shirt to Indy with nothing more than a club when you just acknowledge Indy's armed with a gun and a whip?
Fate ciò che volete con lui. Mi occuperò di Antonio.
Indy leaves his friend Father Antonio to whatever fate Father Ventura plans for him. Those fascists walk right past Indy to confront Locus on the stairs. I mean, yeah, they're fascists, so it's not so unbelievable that they would prioritize the non-white guy, but it was a narrow staircase, and Indy is armed.
scramble.
No, wait.
Rather than hold the door of the Zeppelin open for Indy, Gina lets it close, which leaves the Indy almost dying by hanging from it with his whip. And now she's suddenly helpful, opening the door and helping him up.
The Great Circle's the biggest mystery in all of archaeology.
Only the ones who might appear on the History Channel. The Great Circle is a fairly recent conspiracy theory that cropped up on the internet a decade ago. Archaeologists in the 1930s had no concept of it, because it'd be rather easily debunked, so why waste your career on it?
Throughout history, mankind has built sites of great spiritual significance. Siwa, Giza, Persepolis, Mohenjo-Daro, Sukhothai, Nazca, Machu Picchu. Now, here's the strange part. If you were to draw a line through these ancient sites around the globe, you get a perfectly aligned circle.
There are an infinite amount of circles you can draw on a globe, and thousands of ancient historical sites. You know what would be an amazing coincidence? If you couldn't draw a circle and connect more than a few of them.
Nazis don't care about history, Dr. Jones. They only care about power.
Legend says that the Great Circle does have some power, something about its geometry, a deeper force that connects these sites.
Can you explain what legend you're pulling this from? I would expect a professor of archaeology to not speak in such broad terms as legends say.
Yeah, but that's superstition. And I don't believe in superstition.
Neither do I.
You found the Ark of the Covenant that melted a bunch of Nazis just 2 years ago, and before that witnessed a cult in India rip out people's hearts and cause famines with ancient stones.
Voss thinks those stone relics can help the Reich, then we have to find them before he does.
No, you have to find them. I have to find my sister.
Well, at least one of these two has an interesting goal you can make a good game about.
It's an antique, by the way.
What?
A hairpin. Early 19th century.
That was a gift from my sister.
This is a horrible misuse of some ethnic group's cultural heritage, making it into a Chekhov's gun to be used later. And yeah, taking it out of the country and giving it to your sister to use as a hairpin. That's pretty insulting too.
Wissen Sie, Bergmann, willensschwache Männer sind am einfachsten zu manipulieren.
We were this close to being past the era of equating Nazis with modern-day social media discourse dialogue. Now we have 4 more years of it to cringe over. This is one of the few times where stealth during a cutscene looks just as shoddy as it does in the gameplay. Gina has a contact here in Giza who is expecting her. I guess it just worked out that the next stop in her search for her sister brought her to the same place the Nazis were headed, a location on the Great Circle where they might find a stone.
The Idol of Ra.
Voss believes it to be here, Dr. Jones.
What is it?
It's a statue, perhaps this big, cursed with a terrible power, according to the old Egyptian legend.
Why would every civilization that possessed one of these Great Circle relics all land upon the same plan of hiding them inside similar-sized statues? The Egyptians had the same light-sensing technology that the ancient South Americans did. Now that's a conspiracy Indy should look into. The trigger for the trap in this room under the Sphinx wasn't taking the mask, but sitting in the throne near it. Large scorpions are far less threatening and less venomous. What you need to be worried about are the small ones.
Take this back to the wall. Tell her she can put it in her museum.
The game seems to operate on this bizarre moral calculus where cultural heritage only needs to be respected if it's not plot critical. As soon as an artifact is needed for the main quest, suddenly all that careful consideration about proper archaeological practices and cultural ownership goes right out the window. The idea seems to be that regular artifacts belong to their country of origin, but anything powerful or mystical is somehow exempt from those same rules. Nazis can't tell the difference between a white American man and a European woman from the local Arab men they use for physical labor.
Das grenzt an Hochverrat!
Mir untersteht die gesamte Wehrmacht!
Voss is extremely upset that Gantz killed a giant that he was instructed to interrogate, going as far as calling the killing treason, which has to be the first case of a Nazi soldier killing a non-white man to be called that.
Wo waren die Affengeräusche? Um ihren peinlichen Versuch, Dominanz zu zeigen, zu unterstreichen.
I never thought I'd consider taking a sin off for Nazis being in a game. They have to be the most entertaining Nazi duo I've ever seen. I'm still not removing the sin, but their entertainment value is noted. That was a solid wood ceiling. I don't know how it collapses under the weight of just 2 people.
Indiana Jones.
Voss?
One of these days, there have to be 2 archaeologists that don't know each other. It's not that small of a field.
It's Adamic. Isn't it?
Adamic.
According to legends, Adamic was the first language given to men by God.
For an archaeologist, Indy sure does jump to conclusions fast. Voss distracts him with info on Gina's sister, while Gantz comes from behind, and a slapstick fight begins where people are punched, knock themselves out, and Voss accidentally saves Gantz from being shot twice. And through all that, even the 2 gunshots, none of the other Nazis heard this and came running, since Indy knocks the 2 of them out and they escape.
If, God forbid, things go up in a puff of smoke, the way you came in will be closed. Now that leaves this tunnel as our only exit.
Why didn't we just use this tunnel to get inside in the first place? It's right next to the compound, unguarded, and didn't require work passes to reach.
The Dream Stele is encrypted. The tattoo on the Nephilim, the Guardians, must be the decoding key to solving the cipher.
Why would the Giants tattoo the cipher for deciphering the Dream Stele onto their bodies? Do they have any concept of keeping things secret? Most of these guys don't even wear shirts, and they're tattooing the directions right there on their back. The Dream Stele leads to an entrance under the Great Pyramid. I don't know how anyone, including Voss, missed it. It's just kind of there next to the pyramid. Anyone who went looking, I'm sure, would come across it. Just knock down one flimsy rock wall and you're in. Beneath the pyramid, Indy finds a resonance chamber that amplifies sounds along with Adamic, the first language of man, written onto plaques on the wall. But he somehow knows that the words Locus was speaking in their 2 encounters are the same words he needs here. The guy was using passwords as threats. In the bowels of the chamber is a blind Nephilim that attacks Indy in the dark. He also happens to carry the key Indy needs to progress around his neck. Weird that keeps happening. Removing the idol from the altar activates a trap that fills a room with sand, which handily just floats Indy up to an exit near the top of the room they designed into it, which also leads to a quick escape from the tomb. And here I thought this was designed to keep people from taking the stone by burying the intruder alive. Sand comes rushing out of the tomb and sweeps Indy away, burying him up to his head, and coincidentally not burying the stone as Voss drives up like he somehow was expecting to find Indy here.
Wo sind Sie? Im Himalaya, Herr Sturmbannführer.
A soldier tells Voss that they picked up a distress signal from their missing battleship that has somehow ended up in the Himalayas right in front of Indy like he doesn't speak German.
Aufgepasst, Bergmann. Erst Gegenwehr, dann etwas Bestätigung. Und der willensschwache Mann schwört seine unsterbliche Treue.
The only thing more gullible and easily led around than an insecure male is an insecure writer, which we seem to have plenty of these days. You're not going to shoot him? You're a Nazi. Shooting a defenseless person in the head is the one thing you're good at. And you know Indy isn't working alone, so you might assume Gina might show up and save him, which she does.
Some time ago, Voss discovered an ancient scroll in a tomb in North Africa concerning forbidden stones. Back in March of this year, he had secured funding for a dig in Machu Picchu.
One of the sites of the Great Circle.
Yes, exactly, and there, underneath the ruins, he discovered
A stone.
How did Omar get all this information in a photo of one of these tombs? For a guy we never meet, he's doing some work.
While I was listening to the Nazi transmission, I intercepted a Morse code coming from the Himalayas.
You intercepted a Morse code radio broadcast coming from the Himalayas all the way here in Giza. Ship radios weren't that powerful back then.
We have to get there before the Nazis do.
Yes, but they're too fast. How are we gonna get there in time?
My friends, may I propose a speedy ride aboard the Scarlet Arrow?
There's no way Indy and Gina could beat the Nazis to the Himalayas using a boat against their Zeppelin. None of them are using proper mountain climbing techniques like tying themselves together.
You said you've been here before! What were you doing?
Visiting an old friend!
We kinda are hitting all the Raiders of the Lost Ark locales without even looking for the Ark of the Covenant. In a touch of creative irony, Indiana Jones is ripping off the first Uncharted game, where a Nazi submarine was found stranded on top of a waterfall in the Amazon, a location it couldn't have gotten upstream to, for the obvious reason that a submarine can't travel up a waterfall. At least here there is an explanation for how a Nazi battleship got on top of a mountain. All of the Nazis on the ship froze to death, along with Gina's sister Lara, who was working for Voss to decipher the language on the stones. None of the crew seemed to have made a fire to keep warm despite plenty of burnable material, or put on warm clothes, which naval ships always have because ships often sail through cold waters. The captain went to all the trouble of locking the vault behind him with a passcode that would need deciphering with a code will and waited for his death on the bridge. But you can just walk through the door of the bridge like this Nazi does. So I'm not sure what he accomplished creating a new code that he thought only German soldiers would be able to decipher. This didn't protect the stone any better than hiding in a broom closet. Rather than help Indy beat the Nazi, Gina becomes fascinated with a grenade for some reason. You don't start planning for a Hail Mary before you have no other recourse. Right now it's just a grenade, which is useless to them.
Have you ever heard of Höhenangst?
Fear of heights.
Yes! And I have it. And still, I endured this dreadful mountain even if my mind was screaming every step of the way.
If the Nazis had decided to give lectures every time they had someone at their mercy as much as they're depicted doing in entertainment, I'd start believing in Holocaust denial, because there's no way they could be efficient enough with that much talking.
What you have is your stupid American cartoons. Choo-choo! Choo-choo!
Your allies are Japan. You sure you want to talk about cartoons?
You laugh and dance, celebrating your own idiocy and drinking the piss you call beer!
Okay, he's got us on that one. What was Gina's plan if the grenade didn't set off an avalanche? What was her plan if it did? Adding natural disasters plus Nazis doesn't improve your odds. The Wilhelm bloodline didn't survive the war, I'm afraid. We all make fun of Crystal Skull for allowing Indy to survive a nuke by hiding inside a fridge, but that's because that was in a movie. The fridge scene would have worked in a game and been considered pretty badass due to games being allowed to play with absurdity and survivability more. However, Indy surviving a German battleship, sailing down a Himalayan mountain, and then teleporting himself to China with a magic stone is pushing even game logic.
I am invincible!
I'm fine with the ironic death, but could Gantz have at least gotten a fight before he died? The game spent a lot of time on his scenes. The stone has a sense for nostalgia and brings Indy and Gina to Shanghai during the middle of Japan's invasion. You could argue this was done to bring Japan, the third member of the Axis, briefly into the fold, but it was clearly for the Temple of Doom reference. They even fly through Lao Che's cabaret club at one point.
It's a plane. I can fly that thing.
Gina's plan is still a plane that somehow landed intact on a roof nearby, and she can fly this plane even without a runway to take off from, launching from an uneven surface just a few meters long. There is no chance in hell a World War I era biplane is going to outfly Japanese Zeros. Gina flies the plane to a bombed-out cabaret club that belonged to Lao Che from Temple of Doom, all for a movie reference that could have easily gotten them killed, since with all the smoke, you couldn't see if there was a path through it, and one would normally just fly over it. Indy's plan? Get them a new plane. Thankfully, some Japanese pilots play along and fly alongside them long enough for Indy to wing walk over, and the pilot, rather than spinning the plane to knock Indy off their wing, has his wingmen get out to fight him. Indy has no trouble flying a Japanese warplane across China during the War with Japan all the way to Sukhothai, the next location on the Great Circle.
College administration. They decided to let you go.
I guess Indy didn't have tenure. I also don't know what the point of firing Indy is. He still works for the college in The Last Crusade, so he clearly gets his job back. Locus is spending all of his time harassing Indy, when Voss is the one with the majority of the stones and the drive to use them.
I'm sorry about Lara.
There had to be several days of travel in between here and Shanghai. You never found the time to bring this up during the trip.
For what it's worth. When we first met, I thought you were a heartless, grave robber.
That would make you a bad journalist then. Is that how you see all archaeologists?
Now, why are your soldiers fighting fascists?
We fight anyone who tries to steal our country's heritage.
Don't worry, Indy is only going to take the most important relic full of magical power from your country. You can keep your pottery shards and burial masks.
What makes you any different from Boss? You are both here to steal our cultural heritage.
No, I'm not here to steal anything, but to ask for your permission. I have the greatest respect for your culture and its history.
Your claims of not being a grave robber or stealing cultural heritage ring hollow when you've done that multiple times. What were you going to do with that fertility idol back in South America? You were stealing it from a local tribe who rightfully chased you away.
โถอาถรรพ์โถที่ต้องคำสาปด้วยมนต์ดำภายในโถบรรจุสิ่งที่คุณเกลียดกลัวที่สุดที่สัมผัสได้คุณจะต้องล้วงมือลงไปในโถเพื่อคว้าเอามันออกมาเผชิญหน้ากับสิ่งที่คุณกลัว
These villagers like pranking white people with tests of courage to earn their trust. But seriously, how do you know you can trust Indy? As it turns out, Sunan went looking for the ancient legend himself and discovered a giant in the jungle who showed him one of the tablets, which seems counterproductive to keeping them hidden if they just show them to some random villager who shows up.
Seems to be a good boat.
Can't swim.
Gina didn't have a phobia of water last night on the way here, or any of the boats she's been on previously. The stones existing I can understand due to the biblical connection, but how did the giant snake get here? And why is it guarding this temple? There should be a lot fewer villagers in this jungle since it has to eat something. Somehow Indy will still have a fear of snakes after this.
It's here, Gina. This map shows the way to the stone.
The Nephilim Order built this entire temple, all to hide a map that pointed to where they keep the stone in another temple. That's a lot of effort to protect a simple map room you didn't even need to build. And Sunan mentioned a giant showing him a stone like the one Indy has when he discovered this place. Yet the stone is kept inside a statue at a different location.
I warned you.
The Nephilim literally created maps to the locations of the stones and tattooed directions into their body. You can't blame people for being tempted. Gina throws one rock and collapses the entire floor. If this temple were that fragile, it wouldn't be standing after all this time. If Locust can break the neck of the giant snake, then Indy shouldn't have stood a chance against him.
Boss is expecting you to fight.
I don't think he is. Voss knows nothing about Locust following Indy around. Indy leaves Locust unconscious and face down in a pool of water, which means Locust would drown. These long-lost ancient hiding places are getting easier and easier to find. This one was just covered by a small rock, which stopped the German expedition from finding it.
Jones, it's the game!
We're gonna need more people if we're gonna play.
Indy can't progress to the temple without more people to play the game the Nephilim created, so they return to the village and recruit Sunan, his daughter, and a few others, then bring them back here to act as game pieces. All of that when some rocks and pressure plates would have sufficed, and Indy refuses to use all the people to make it easier to solve, as Gina and Sunan won't stand on a plate.
Carrying with it 17 sacred stones and a warning to all men. The voice of God descended on the earth. Voice of God.
It sure is strange how these devout Nephilim, who know the existence of God and are devoted to atoning for their part in the Great Flood, used all these false gods and idols from other religions inside their sacred temples, even hiding divine artifacts created by God inside heretical statues. Ancient civilizations need a new security system. They all use the same one, and it never works. Imagine designing a security system that destroys the thing it's protecting and the entire structure surrounding it. How did Voss once again know where to find Indy right as he found another stone? Voss is depicted as being a very intelligent and skilled archaeologist who was doing just fine locating the stones until Indy got involved, and then suddenly couldn't find anything on his own. Fire! With aim like that, it's no wonder why they lost the war. Locust was shot in the shoulder, which caused him to drop the stones he took from Indy, but he can still lift a stone plate that weighs a ton or more no problem despite the injury. You don't even need the stone shield. Locust walked right into fire, slowly picked up a slab, and the Nazis still missed every shot. In fact, the only shots these Nazis can land are on their Italian allies who are just about to flank Indy. Indy really doesn't understand the concept of switching magazines, because he has to throw away a submachine gun and switch to a fresh one when he runs dry in this boat chase. Voss takes Gina with him, figuring Indy will come for her and bring the 2 stones. But as far as Voss knows, Indy drowned in the river and the stones are lying at the bottom of it somewhere. And Indy could send the stones back to the US and rescue Gina without unintentionally delivering the stones to Voss. Furthermore, Voss assumes Indy knows where he's headed. The only way Indy could possibly know Voss's destination is the Ziggurat of would be because it lies on the Great Circle. But there's no order these go in. Voss could have just as easily returned to any location on the Great Circle. Or none of them. The gigantic black man took that long to realize that the Nazi was the worst threat. How did the Germans keep operating with impunity inside British colonies, even setting up a military garrison based in the Ziggurat of which was a major British archaeological site at the time? Tony Todd ripped that move straight out of The Princess Bride.
Let's go get that last stone.
There's more here than a stone.
What else is there?
Locust can't speak about that, since it's meant to be a big reveal in about 5 minutes. Voss needed Gina to lure Indy here to retrieve the stones from him, but he locks her up in the storage house with no guards outside the Ziggurat. He gets very lucky that Gina talks Indy into going inside the Ziggurat after him after freeing her.
Once guards are gone, find your friend and leave.
You're awfully willing to sacrifice yourself and your people for the life of this woman. Your plan consists of storming the Nazis unarmed. Human wave attacks have a sky-high casualty rate, and you only have 3 friends to storm the Ziggurat with, so that's not even close to enough to overwhelm them. Despite coming under attack by the Nephilim and sounding an alarm, the Nazis have another alarm they can sound if they spot Indy sneaking around, even though they're supposed to be distracted at the moment.
Don't you want to know what this is all about?
Yeah, Indy, don't you want to risk everything by turning over the stones to Voss to satisfy your curiosity? Just like my sister did, which got her killed and imperiled the world? How did the British never find Noah's Ark down here when they excavated the Ziggurat of in the 1920s? Discovering and claiming ancient history for themselves was something the Brits were good at.
If we're both caught, Voss gets the stones. I'll go down, find a safe way through. You stay here.
No, I want to come with you.
Stay here with the stones until I come back.
You could have just left those stones somewhere else. Maybe mailed them back to America before coming here. Leaving the stones with Gina isn't protecting them any better than keeping them on yourself.
I found Noah's Ark.
What makes you think it's the real one?
Oh, come on, Indy. You just saw Noah's Ark right outside this tent. Then again, this is the second Noah's Ark Indy has canonically encountered, so maybe he's right to be suspicious.
I'll knock your teeth out.
Fair warning. I have mastered the lethal Japanese hand-to-hand combat art of karate.
Don't laugh at that line too much. Nowadays, fascists like to brag about taking MMA lessons.
What do you know about the myth of the Great Flood?
Which one? There's thousands to choose from. You have the classic from the Hebrew Bible, the Sumerian creation myth, the great flood of the Chinese Ganyu, the blood deluge of Ymir.
Since this seems to line up pretty clearly with the biblical account of the flood, doesn't that mean all other religions are false?
17 stones, 17 words. Each stone connected to one of the locations of the Great Circle. Noah used the stones to gather animals from around the world, and then, after the flood was over, to repopulate the earth.
The story of Noah's Ark makes way more sense the way this game explains it. Even most religious folk gave up trying to argue that one, and just refer to it as a parable these days.
But over time, the stones were lost, stolen, forgotten, so the giants formed an alliance with the Vatican to seek out and find the stones again.
That just begs the question of why were the Nephilim so terrible at protecting them in the first place? They scattered the stones around the ancient world, hiding them inside important idols of different civilizations, which meant they became symbols of worship, which of course makes them targets for thieves and invading armies. And all of this was done to atone for something they don't even know if they're guilty of. How do you convince every descendant of yours for the next 10,000 or so years that they have to dedicate their entire life to this purpose?
Because I have something she would want to hear.
This is Lara Lombardi, aboard the SS Comet. Boss, if you hear this, your experiment failed.
Hold on just a minute. The only place Voss could have found this recording left by Gina's sister before her death would have been on board the German ship stranded in the Himalayas, a ship that was destroyed along with the entire party of Nazis Voss sent there to search it. So how did he get his hands on Laura's recording? This couldn't have been the SOS that was sent out, because that was Morse code, and Gina would have recognized her sister's voice and said something about it. But she was surprised to find out that she was even on board the ship.
Captain wants me to perform the experiment again, to get us back to safety. But I refuse. I'd rather die with the stone than let you have it. I hope you burn it.
What a preposterous woman.
That's a nice attitude to develop after you've already helped him so much, but if Voss has found this message and listening to it, then he's clearly already reclaimed the stone in the Himalayas. Voss somehow knew Gina would pick up his gun that he sat down to discuss the Ark with Indy, so it was unloaded. Voss takes Indy's whip and carries it around for the entire finale for no reason other than it needs to be there for the final fight.
Imagine this gift in the hands of the mighty German Wehrmacht. A panzer division appearing out of nowhere in the middle of Times Square, Washington, D.C., or in front of your university.
I'm questioning the value of the Nazis' plans for the Ark. It can travel to any location on Earth in an instant, but's limited to the only locations on the Great Circle, most of which would be useless in German war plans, since none of them are in Europe and North America. The only useful location would be Egypt, which the Nazis had no trouble reaching anyway.
When you write about this, Miss Lombardi, remember, Emmerich Voss, with 2 M's and 2 S's, like SS.
Are you planning on letting Gina live after this? I don't think you'd want Germany's enemies knowing exactly how the Wehrmacht is teleporting around the world. Also, laying it on a little thick with that whole SS thing, right? Gina must have forgotten about the hairpin dagger her sister gave to her back when she was tied up by Voss in the shack outside. That Deus Ex Machina is hardly needed when you have a real Deus Ex Machina happening right in front of you.
Why are you laughing?
What did you think would happen?
I mean, you both know these stones work. A German ship was teleported to the Himalayas and Indy was sent to Shanghai.
You did this job. You sabotaged my experiment!
No, boss! This is your own doing!
Do you not notice Gina untying the two of them? You should have your men shoot them all right now. While the Great Flood Part 2 gets started, Indy has a karate battle with a Nazi archaeologist on top of Noah's Ark. Did Voss do some training with Mr. Miyagi? He's doing all the classic moves. Wax on, crane kick. It would be adorable if fist fighting were at all as well implemented as using a melee weapon. Meanwhile, Gina wrestles with Voss's mute driver, who is nearly the same size as Locus, and wins by throwing him overboard. Voss is better with a whip than Indy. Did they study that in university? Why would you walk in front of the wheel to make Locus get away from it instead of attacking him from behind while he's focused on steering?
Locus! Off boat! Now!
But that was certain death just a moment ago. I had to hang above the water and kick a Nazi just to survive, but somehow they make it to land despite the massive waves and Gina being unable to swim. Locus pilots the Ark through the portal to Antarctica, where it's implied by his footprints that he survived, which flies in the face of all the Nazis who froze to death when the same thing happened to them in Nepal. Just how the hell would he survive in Antarctica? He had no food, no supplies, nothing. The worst part of Indiana Jones has always been the relationship. When Indy wasn't statutory raping a 14-year-old and sleeping with the same Nazi his dad was boning, Steven Spielberg was casting his own girlfriend as the most annoying female lead ever, so he could realize his fetish of watching her make out with Harrison Ford, who possessed the romantic chemistry of Diet Mountain Dew and a roofie, and in this game it's little better. I'm only surprised there's a relationship at all. I guess since the writers made Gina's sister a lesbian, they figured at least one of them had to be straight and interested in men, but this sudden romance rings so hollow that it makes me think Gina would have been better off with that blonde Nazi chick I met in a side quest.
Stupid American cartoons. Choo-choo! Choo-choo!
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, maybe subscribe, and then vote for which of these two games you'd like to see Sin next by posting in the comments, and maybe go watch another video. I have over 200 Sin videos at this point, so I'm bound to have covered at least a few you're interested in. I even cover old games and DLC now on my Patreon, which is half off for your first month for the next 4 days. I'm going to be sending the classic Squaresoft horror game Parasite Eve this month on it, and following that, Bioshock Evidence DLC. You can find the link down below. Special thanks to patrons Vanilla Pixel, Brainwayne, Chris, Alexander Q. Cortez, Ben, Roman Are You Sleeping, Nervous Nelly, Xavier Destalis, Notorious SKP, Max Headroom, DJ Nelson, Azeneth the Succubus, Musical Pumpkin, Castlemania, Zinro, Michelle C., Yaroslav Golubev, Dennis O'Brien, Mal Rose, Jake B., Donald Talbot, Montezuma, Aaron Hines, Sky is Under, PK Reed, Eric Kisser, Shadow Wolf Gaming, Urpel Jaeger, Church Kiones, S. Venus, Mario Neto, Ben Hottie, Biohazard, Director Anarchy, and Charmsy.